Okay, now we're on to part 2 of our Unit 7 notes. Okay, we just landed on the Industrial Revolution and Factories one, just to remember that our inventions include water frame, spinning jenny, and power loom for the cloth, cotton gin by Eli Whitney, and interchangeable parts by him as well. Robert Livingston is in charge of the steamboat being created. All of these guys made patents so that way they can get the profit off of it. But Samuel Slater tried to bring the invention to the U.S., and so did Francis Cabot Lowell, to make a step-by-step instruction. Okay, pictures of it right here. Agriculture and economic growth that happens during this time. Agriculture is products sold locally, mostly in the northeast coast. In the late 1700s, this farming method spreads west with the American settlers as they expand the country in the region near the Ohio River. Many of these people focused on actually raising pork and cash crops more than anything else, such as corn and wheat. But further in the south, cotton production was increased and was mostly shipped north to the manufacturing mills between 1790 and 1820, seeing that cotton production soaring from 3,000 bales per year to 30,000 bales per year. What this does means, though, is that it increases the number of enslaved workers between those years, and it goes from 700,000 in the U.S. to 1.2 million slaves in the U.S., just in less than 30, 40 years. All of this increases the size of corporations and products that are sold by water, as well as city populations. When you move west, you have people like Daniel Boone, who made a difference and actually caused a lot of historical events. In the 1790 census, which is the official population count each time, it shows that there is nearly 4 million Americans within the small parts no further than the Appalachian Mountains, so mostly East Coast. People like Daniel Boone, who is one of the first pioneers to venture west, explored the Native American Trail, leading through the Appalachian Mountains and using what's called the Cumberland Gap to go into places like Kentucky. He brought 30 skilled foresters to help clear a path for the future pioneers that follow him, and the Wilderness Road was made by clearing the rocks and cutting down trees, marking the path all the way to Kentucky. One of the other ways they moved west is through waterways, obviously on rivers and lakes. They made the roads and trails and travel. So after Daniel Boone goes west into Kentucky, a lot of companies would follow him, creating turnpikes and toll roads. Now, this is not paved like what we have now. They're still dirt roads, but they're something that they start to charge on. When they do this, they crush the stones and making services with logs. It allows for Ohio to become a state in 1803 because enough people can get west. And this begins in 1811, which actually helps to be stopped in the War of 1812 that happens. So they stop all expansion west because they have to have this fight. And after the war ends, they start to finish it in 1818. Rivers were allowed for using the rivers and lakes to transport materials on the boats and barges, makes it a lot easier than having to count it and carry it on the roads. By the 1780s, farmers were already using steamboats to travel. Most of the steamboats actually had limited to larger rivers or bodies of water when it came to how they would work. But they used canals later to make the larger cities connected with bodies of water. And one of the more known ones is the Erie Canal, which is actually 363 miles long, taking 8 years to build. Okay, and it allows for boat travel from Buffalo, New York, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, basically carving out a trail inland and letting that water get past. Other ways, including for those 3-4 options, when these roads are built, it means that the population expands, gets larger, they go further west, and land is settled by the pioneers. By 1821, you have states like Vermont, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Mississippi, Alabama, and Missouri that are made. The population increases for the United States to 581,000 people, and most of these pioneers are settling along rivers and fertile lands because without water, you can't live. So that has to be something that they do. Then you have people like Henry Clay with their idea of economics trying to help the United States with their money making. Jefferson wanted a limited central government, but that couldn't happen. He was president. And then Madison wants the federal government to guide the westward expansion, being in charge. Then when Monroe was elected president, this is a time of intense division between the Federalists and Republicans. So these two political parties are causing even more problems. This time, regardless of the fact that they fight, is actually called Era of Good Feelings, which is kind of ironic because there was not any good feelings. Henry Clay was a Republican and Speaker of the House during that era, who proposed that the program to help the nation grow even more was to raise the tariffs, create a new Bank of the United States, so a new version of it, and have internal improvements like building more roads and bridges and canals, trying to make more money, although it's a harder process because you got to create other things that's going to mess up the money trail. Okay. We have an increase in nationalism and Supreme Court decisions. It becomes more popular. Congress actually agrees to follow some of Henry Clay's ideas, but not because of how expensive it would be. They start to look into that second bank idea in 1816, since the previous one actually expired in 1811. And it wasn't that it expired and went bad, it was just the idea that they needed to revise it, so to speak. Many states during those 5 years of closure made unwise decisions of loans and overspending. So without the Federal Bank of the U.S., the states had to make their decisions with their money, and it didn't work out very well. Congress agrees to have those higher tariffs for the businesses, and it helps with the American manufacturers so they can make money off of foreign competition. The three Supreme Court cases that help with this nationalism and increase it are McCulloch versus Maryland, Fletch versus Peck, and Gibbons versus Ogden. Then we have the Missouri Compromise, which is very popular, and the statehood of Missouri. By 1819, Missouri asked Congress for admission into statehood. They've got enough people. Most of the settlers had come from Kentucky and Tennessee, which we share a border with, and it tries to allow for slavery. They believe slavery should be legal in Missouri. But regardless, you've got representatives like James Talmadge who proposed that Missouri could slowly get rid of slavery, so they were admitted into the Union. If they became a free state, the southern states would now be in minority with how many is slavery versus free state. To make Missouri a state, Congress then creates the Missouri Compromise. They say that Maine would be coming into the Union as a free state, so that way Missouri can come as a slave state, and it balances Congress with the same number of free versus slave. A line that is drawn across the Louisiana Purchase after the act is passed is called the 36 degrees by 30 degrees northern latitude line, which is the southern border of Missouri. And so everything above that line would be free of slavery, and south would be that allowed for slavery. And I know that's spelled wrong, even though Missouri is a slave state. Okay, now, at the same time, our relations between Britain and Spain have issues, but also are helping us out. By 1817, Rush versus Bagot Agreement, where the two countries agree to limit their naval vessels in the Great Lake area. Okay, Convention of 1818 sets the northern boundary of the Louisiana Territory between the U.S. and Canada. Okay, it also agrees to not have any armed border between the two. John Adams also negotiated the Oregon Territory for us to have, since we were venturing west with Lewis and Clark. Spain owns the colonies of Florida. Remember, we hadn't gone all the way down because we agreed not to. But in 1810, the American settlers didn't care about that border, and they rebelled against the Spanish, claiming the western areas of Florida in the Louisiana Purchase. By 1812, the U.S. took control forcefully of the western areas of Florida. Now we have the Monroe Doctrine, where Spain regains power with help from 4 other countries, so they're tired of the U.S. actions. By 1822, France, Austria, Russia, and Prussia wanted to help Spain gain back their land that they lost to the U.S. President Monroe at the time issued a statement December 2nd, 1823, saying that the U.S. would not get involved in any wars or internal affairs of Europe. It also said that the North and South America continents are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European countries. Basically, the U.S. is trying to claim both continents only for U.S. exploration. Basically, they drew a line essentially right through the middle of the Atlantic, saying nothing from this area can be for Europe and only for us. It is a clear warning to stay out of the Americas, and was later a guiding policy for future U.S. foreign policy. From Monroe to Adams to Jackson, you've got these 3 different presidents happening. Monroe's presidency ends in 1825. The following election has 4 candidates: William Crawford, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and John Adams. The next one that is elected is John Adams. who was the son of the other President Adams that has already happened. In his first speech to Congress, Adams talks about his plans to improve the roads and waterways, build a national university, and support scientific research. Many of the representatives felt that this provided too much federal influence and power, and they thought that the money that would go towards this shouldn't be used just for one presidency. While Adams ran for his second presidency, political parties did what's called mudslinging or insulting of the opposite party to ruin those representations. Okay? In the end, Jackson won the presidential election with John Calhoun losing or becoming vice president. The beginning of Jackson's presidency, and I'll say it over and over, he is my least favorite president. He promised an equal protection and equal benefits for everyone, which actually means only for white American men. He represented the newly official Democratic Party. He made sure the idea pushing towards ordinary citizens running for government, and this party used to be called Democratic Republican, changing its name for the election. Jackson quickly fired all the federal workers that are replacing them with his regular supporters in the White House and everywhere else. The federal workers became protesting him called a tyrant, and the idea of replacing federal workers is called a spoils system. So he changes it all to make him work with what he wants. Okay? They have the caucus system and start to have national conventions. Delegates from each state chooses a party's presidential candidate trying to run for office. In the controversy of 1828, the end of Adams' presidency, Congress has passed a very high tariff law proposed by Henry Clay. This was helpful for Nebraska factory owners because it encourages American-made goods to be bought instead of European ones. The South didn't like this law because it hurt their trade with Europe, all that cotton going that way. Jackson's vice president, or Calhoun, claimed that the states would nullify this law, but that Jackson disagreed. So the president and vice president disagree on what to do, and he thought that nullifying the law would destroy the Union. With the opposite point of view, Jackson vetoes the bill as president, and it's called the Maysville Road Bill. He said that this should state projects, not a federal one. In 1832, Congress passes a lower tariff to try and fix this. South Carolina immediately passes the Nullification Act, and they threaten to secede from the Union because they don't like that idea. Jackson causes more problems afterwards. After the tariff issue is passed, Jackson enacts the Force Bill and allows for him to use the military to enforce federal laws. South Carolina accepted the lower tariff instead, but once again they nullified the Force Bill, so they disagree. With Western expansion happening at the same time of all this controversy, you have issues with Native American tribes, which are positive, but also negative depending on the tribe. Those 5 civilized tribes include the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw. Americans once again try to steal their land and don't really respect their native rights. They force them to leave their home, and Jackson supports the idea that they should be relocated. Many of these Native Americans who are in the Kentucky and Mississippi area get put onto the Great Plains, even though they're not from there, never lived there. And this is through the Indian Removal Act that's supposed to legally make them move, mostly into the area of Oklahoma. The Cherokee tribe refuses to move, but eventually move through Georgia's forced pressure and state laws to other areas. It's eventually made a Supreme Court decision because the Cherokee tribe actually goes to the Supreme Court to try and keep their land. The case, which is Worcester versus Georgia, allows for the Cherokee to be supported by the government. John Marshall, the Chief Justice, says that Georgia has no right to make the Cherokee move, but Jackson disagrees and ignores the decision, still making them move. By 1838, out of 17,000 Cherokee, only 2,000 have moved by that time, and at the end of Jackson's presidency, he made sure that his successor, who's Van Buren, would still force them to move. Okay, this is where we have the Trail of Tears. Jackson and Van Buren worked together to make the military force the 15,000 Cherokee to move. 7,000 troops are involved, moving them all the way across to the Indian Territory that is now Oklahoma by December of 1838. These people are unprepared, they have no resources, it causes over 2,000 of them to die, and they perish because of their walking, their hunger, and weather exposure. In the end, a third of the Cherokee people die, which is over 5,000, where they call it the Trail of Tears, or the trail that they cried. Regardless, Jackson doesn't care, he thinks it improves the government. Eventually, he starts up a new bank. Look to the timeline, and